Okay, this is just me going through the little algorithm questions I gave you to do. I'll do one question at a time, see how we go time-wise. I might split this video up, I might not. Right, okay, question one. I asked you to create a loop to execute 10 times using for loop, while loop, repeat until loop. Now, in pseudocode, you have a control variable. So if we look at the first one called n, and you'll see that there's a control variable in each one that's basically just a counter. And in a for loop, we just say from 1 to 10. And what that does, the statements that we put inside the loop that we want to execute over and over again, the value of n starts at 1. So this is the initial value for n. This is the final value for n that we want. When we get to the bottom of the loop and we say next n, what happens automatically is 1 is added to the value of n, and then we go up here and check to see if n is bigger than that number, okay, the number 10. So what we tend to use, we use the loop value n inside the loop in some way. So you can always refer to it. So the first time through the loop n is 1, then it's 2, 3, 4 and so on up to 10. Okay, now what you'll find is that a for loop is actually a while loop where the management is done for you with this loop variable. So if we look at the pseudocode version of a while loop, we have to initialize n to value. Now in this case, what I've chosen to do is to start at 0, and I've got a while, and then the condition for my while says while n is less than 10. So while this is true, do the statements inside the loop. So I've got my statements, but what I must make sure I do is that inside the loop there must be something that will eventually make this condition false, and then the loop will stop. If I don't do that, for instance, if I'd have said n is greater than 0, that's my condition, then if we just keep adding 1 to n, that loop's going to keep going on and on and on, and depending on your program environment, if you're on a 32-bit computer and you're storing an integer value, the default will be 32-bit integer, which will give you a value up to plus 2 billion before 2's complement kicks in and you wrap round to a negative value. So you'll end up with a loop that runs 2 billion times, okay, which is probably not what you intended. So it's very important to make sure that something inside the loop eventually makes the loop stop. See, that was all managed for you in the for loop, but the for loop is essentially doing this. If I wanted to do 1 to 10, I could have replaced the 0, put a 1, but I would have had to change my condition to less than or equal to 10. Then that would have executed with the values n from 1 all the way up to 10. Okay, but the statement that I asked you to write was just something that happens 10 times. So I could have done 10, starting at 10 while n is less than 20. That would have executed 10 times. Depends what you want the n for. If it's just a pure counter, just keep it simple for yourself. Okay, so we test at the start with while loops. Right, the repeat loop, again, I'm starting n at 0, and you can see what we do is we don't test, so we're always going to execute once with a repeat until, remember. So we do our statements here, then we've got the line of code that increments the n. Increment's just a fancy word for saying add. Okay, so we increment by 1, and then we do our test. And unlike a while loop, repeats carry on until something's true. So we say repeat until this is true. So as soon as n becomes 10, we stop. In the while loop, we do the loop while something's true. So there's a slight different logic on those. Okay. Now if you look at the Python ones are obviously very similar to the pseudocode. Bit simpler to write because you don't have the end markers. So for the for loop we had next, but with Python, because they're trying to keep it short for you, you just put colon and then your statements in a block. it's automatically done for you. Okay. Now in the range function, that will generate a number list between 0 and 9. So it'll give you 10 elements starting at 0. Okay, so it'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The while loop looks practically the same as what we've written. It's just the only thing missing is loop. Okay, so you just have that. The repeat until, now this is the thing that looks completely different in Python, remember, because there isn't such a thing. So what we're doing is we're manually building the structure that repeat until in pseudocode has. So we have the initialization, and then if you look at repeat, there's no condition on that. So we can do the same in Python by creating an infinite loop. So we say while true. Do our statements, do the n equals n plus 1, and n plus equals 1 is a short way of incrementing. Okay, and then this line here, this if, is equivalent to our until command. So we're saying if n is equal to 10, remember equals means is it the same as, then we say break, which is exactly what the until's doing. So this loop carries on until we hit this break line, and then the break line says come out of the loop. Okay, so yeah, they're the three basic loop mechanisms. Remember there's another loop mechanism which is recursion, but we're not talking about that here. Okay, so if you use a for loop, the incrementing and checking of n is done for you. If you use a while or a repeat until loop, you have to do it manually. Okay, and you have to make sure you do it correctly. Okay, so that's question 1.